In the realm where clouds drift like thoughts across an endless sky, there lived a being of boundless energy and restless spirit. The Monkey King had achieved immortality through cunning and determination, yet within his powerful heart stirred a discontent that no treasure could satisfy, no victory could quell. His golden staff could extend to touch the heavens, his somersaults could carry him across galaxies in a single bound, yet something essential remained just beyond his grasp. The palace he had claimed among the clouds was magnificent beyond mortal imagination. Pillars of jade reached toward infinity, floors of polished crystal reflected the dance of celestial light, and gardens bloomed with flowers that sang in harmonious whispers. Yet, as the Monkey King sat upon his throne of carved dragon bone, watching the eternal sunset paint the sky in shades of amber and rose, he felt the familiar stirring of emptiness within his chest. His monkey subjects scurried about the palace grounds, their chatter filling the air with joyous noise, but their king heard only the echo of his own solitude. He had defeated the greatest warriors, outwitted the cleverest sages, and claimed dominion over vast territories, yet peace remained as elusive as morning mist. The very immortality he had fought so hard to achieve now felt like a burden, an endless expanse of time stretching before him with no clear purpose or destination. On this particular evening, as golden light filtered through the palace windows and cast long shadows across the marble floors, the Monkey King rose from his throne and walked to the great balcony that overlooked the realm of clouds. Below him, the world of mortals continued its ancient dance of birth and death, joy and sorrow, while above the stars began their nightly vigil. He gripped the balcony's edge with hands that could crush mountains, yet felt powerless against the restlessness that gnawed at his spirit. The wind carried whispers of distant lands, tales of wise teachers and sacred mountains where enlightenment was said to dwell. Among these whispers, one name arose again and again, is spoken with such reverence that even the wind seemed to pause in respect. Buddha, they called him the Awakened One, who had found the peace that transcended all understanding. The Monkey King had heard these stories before, dismissing them as the fantasies of weak minds seeking comfort in impossible dreams. Yet tonight, something in the quality of the whispers stirred a different response within him. Perhaps it was the way the moonlight seemed to carry the words with unusual clarity, or the manner in which the stars appeared to pulse in rhythm with the sacred name. The Monkey King found himself listening with an attention he rarely granted to anything beyond his own desires and ambitions. As the night deepened and the palace grew quiet around him, the Monkey King made a decision that would alter the course of his eternal existence. He would seek out this Buddha not to challenge or conquer, but to understand what manner of being could inspire such universal reverence. The thought both excited and unsettled him, for it meant venturing into territory where his usual tools of force and cunning might prove inadequate. The journey would take him far from his familiar realm, through landscapes both physical and spiritual that he had never explored. Yet, as he stood beneath the star-filled sky, feeling the cool night air against his golden fur, the Monkey King experienced something he had not felt in countless years, genuine curiosity about something greater than himself. In the distance, a temple bell chimed, once its pure tone carrying across the vast expanse of night. The sound seemed to resonate within the Monkey King's chest, creating ripples of awareness that spread through his being like stones dropped into still water. For the first time in his long existence, He wondered if true power might lie not in the ability to conquer others, but in the capacity to understand oneself. The palace around him seemed to hold its breath, as if sensing the magnitude of the decision forming in their king's mind. Even the eternal flames that lit the corridors appeared to burn more softly, casting gentler shadows that danced with unusual grace. The Monkey King closed his eyes and felt the weight of infinite possibility settling upon his shoulders like a cloak woven from starlight and dreams. When dawn broke over the realm of clouds painting the sky in shades of pearl and gold, the Monkey King would begin a journey unlike any he had undertaken before. But for now, in this moment of perfect stillness between night and day, he simply stood and breathed, allowing the profound silence to wash over him like a benediction. The restlessness that had plagued him for so long seemed to quiet, replaced by something deeper and more mysterious, the first stirring of genuine wisdom. When the first light of dawn touched the peaks of the celestial mountains, the Monkey King descended from his palace with a grace that belied his usual boisterous nature. His golden staff, normally carried with proud display, rested quietly across his back, and his steps fell softly upon the cloud paths that led toward the mortal realm below. The transformation in his demeanor was subtle yet profound, as if the night's contemplation had awakened something long dormant within his immortal heart. The journey to find Buddha would not be measured in distance alone, for the awakened one existed in a realm that transcended ordinary geography. Yet, the Monkey King understood that his path must begin in the world of form and substance, among the mountains and valleys where seekers had walked for countless generations. As he traveled, the landscape gradually shifted from the ethereal beauty of his celestial domain to the solid earth and stone of the mortal world. His first destination was Mount Sumeru, the sacred peak that stood at the center of the Buddhist cosmos. Here, ancient monasteries clung to impossible cliff faces, like prayers carved in stone, and the air itself seemed thick with accumulated wisdom. The Monkey King had visited this mountain before, but always as a conqueror, seeking to test his strength against its legendary guardians. Now he approached with different intentions, his immortal senses attuned to subtleties he had previously ignored. The mountain's lower slopes were covered in forests of ancient pines, their branches heavy with the weight of centuries. As the Monkey King walked among these towering trees, he noticed how the sunlight filtered through their needles in patterns that seemed almost like written text, as if the very light carried messages for those who knew how to read them. The forest floor was carpeted with fallen needles that released a fragrance both earthy and transcendent, grounding him in the present moment while simultaneously lifting his awareness toward higher realms. Birds called from hidden perches, their songs weaving together in harmonies that spoke of joy without attachment, beauty without possession. The Monkey King found himself slowing his pace to listen more carefully, his usually restless energy beginning to settle into something resembling patience. A small stream bubbled alongside the path, its clear water reflecting the sky in fragments that danced and merged with each ripple. He paused to drink, and the water tasted of mountain snow and ancient stone, pure and clean in a way that seemed to cleanse not just his throat, but something deeper within. As he climbed higher, the air grew thinner and more crystalline, each breath carrying a clarity that seemed to sharpen his perception. The Monkey King began to notice details that had escaped him before, the way shadows fell across the path in patterns that shifted with the sun's movement, the manner in which wind moved through different types of vegetation to create a symphony of natural sounds, the subtle variations in color and texture that made each stone along the way unique and worthy of attention. Halfway up the mountain, he encountered his first monastery, a collection of simple wooden buildings that seemed to grow from the mountainside itself. Monks in saffron robes moved about their daily tasks with a rhythm that spoke of deep contentment, their faces serene, despite the harsh conditions of their mountain home. The Monkey King watched from a distance, studying the way they carried water, swept courtyards, and tended small gardens with the same careful attention they might give to the most sacred rituals. One elderly monk, his back bent with age but his eyes bright with inner light, noticed the Monkey King's presence and approached without fear. His steps were slow but steady, and when he spoke, his voice carried the gentle authority of one who had found peace within himself. He invited the Monkey King to share their simple meal, offering rice and vegetables prepared with mindful attention to every detail of the cooking process. As they ate in comfortable silence, the Monkey King found himself experiencing taste in a new way. Each grain of rice seemed to carry the essence of earth and rain, sunshine, and the patient labor of farmers. The vegetables spoke of seasons and cycles of growth and harvest, of the interconnected web that sustained all life. The meal, though simple, felt more nourishing than the most elaborate feasts he had enjoyed in his celestial palace. After the meal, the elderly monk led him to a meditation hall where dozens of practitioners sat in perfect stillness, their breathing synchronized with the rhythm of the mountain itself. The Monkey King, accustomed to constant motion and activity, felt initially uncomfortable with the profound quiet that filled the space. Yet, as minutes passed, he began to sense something. Beneath the silence, a presence that seemed to pulse with life and awareness. The monk gestured for him to sit, and though every instinct urged him to continue his journey, the Monkey King found himself settling onto a worn cushion. The position felt foreign to his restless nature, yet, as he attempted to still his body, he began to notice the constant chatter of his own mind. Thoughts arose and dissolved like bubbles in a stream, each one demanding attention before disappearing into the vast space of awareness. Hours passed, though time seemed to lose its usual meaning in the meditation hall. The Monkey King's initial discomfort gradually gave way to a growing sense of spaciousness, as if the boundaries of his identity were softening and expanding. He began to understand that the stillness the monks cultivated was not emptiness, but fullness, not absence, but presence so complete that it required no external validation or expression. When the meditation session ended, the elderly monk approached him once more, this time carrying a small scroll. Without words, he handed it to the Monkey King, who unrolled it to find a simple map marking the location of a remote cave high on the mountain's peak. The monk's eyes twinkled with gentle humor as he whispered that some questions could only be answered in the deepest solitude, where even the mountain's silence seemed loud compared to the quiet of an awakened heart. The path to the cave wound through terrain that seemed to exist at the very edge of the physical world, where solid rock gave way to something more ethereal and dreamlike. The Monkey King climbed steadily upward, his immortal strength carrying him past precipices that would have challenged even the most skilled mountaineers. Yet, with each step, he felt himself moving not just through space, but through layers of understanding, as if the mountain itself were teaching him lessons that could only be learned through direct experience. The air at this altitude was so thin that each breath required conscious effort, forcing him to slow his pace and attend to the simple act of breathing. In this enforced mindfulness, he began to notice how his breath connected him to the vast sky above and the solid earth below, creating a bridge between heaven and earth that existed within his own body. The rhythm of his breathing seemed to synchronize with subtler rhythms he had never perceived before. The pulse of the mountain's ancient heart, the slow dance of clouds across the sky, the patient turning of seasons that mark time's passage in the world below. As he climbed higher, the landscape around him took on an increasingly surreal quality. Rock formations twisted into impossible shapes that seemed to defy the laws of physics, their surfaces carved by wind and weather into patterns that resembled ancient script. The Monkey King found himself pausing frequently to study these natural sculptures, sensing that they contained messages written in a language older than words. Some formations looked like seated figures in meditation, others like hands raised in blessing, and still others like flowers blooming from solid stone. The cave marked on the monk's map was situated on a narrow ledge that jutted out from the mountain's face like a stone platform suspended in space. As the Monkey King approached, he could see that the cave mouth was partially hidden by a curtain of hanging vines, their leaves shimmering with an inner light that seemed to pulse in rhythm with his heartbeat. The entrance was neither large nor imposing, yet something about its simple presence commanded respect and attention. Before entering, he paused to look back at the world spread out below him. From this height, his celestial palace was visible as a distant gleam among the clouds, while the mortal realm stretched away in all directions like a vast tapestry woven from countless individual lives. Cities appeared as clusters of tiny lights, rivers as silver threads connecting distant lands, and forests as patches of green that breathed with the slow rhythm of growing things. The perspective filled him with a strange mixture of humility and wonder, as if he were seeing the world clearly for the first time. The cave interior was larger than its modest entrance, suggested opening into a natural chamber whose walls were lined with crystals that caught and reflected the dim light filtering in from outside. The air inside was warm and still, carrying a faint fragrance of sandalwood and something else he couldn't identify, perhaps the scent of deep time itself, or the accumulated presence of countless seekers who had found their way to this sacred space over the centuries. At the far end of the chamber, a natural stone seat had been carved by water and time into a form perfectly suited for meditation. The Monkey King approached it slowly, his footsteps echoing softly in the crystalline space. As he drew closer, he noticed that the stone was worn smooth by the bodies of previous occupants, polished to a soft sheen that spoke of patient use over many lifetimes. The seat seemed to invite him to rest, to finally cease his endless wandering and simply be present with whatever arose in the silence. Settling onto the stone, the Monkey King felt an immediate sense of rightness, as if he had finally found the place he had been searching for without knowing it. The position aligned his spine, naturally allowing his breath to flow freely while his body remained stable and alert. The cave's acoustics were perfect for meditation, absorbing external sounds while amplifying the subtle internal rhythms of breath and heartbeat that usually went unnoticed in the busy world outside. As he sat in the growing stillness, the Monkey King began to experience something unprecedented in his long existence, a genuine encounter with his own mind. Without the distractions of conquest and adventure, Without the constant stimulation of external challenges and conflicts, he was left alone with the raw material of consciousness itself. At first, the experience was overwhelming, like trying to watch a raging river from within its current, rather than from the safety of its banks. Thoughts arose with tremendous force and frequency, each one demanding immediate attention and action. Memories of past victories and defeats played out in vivid detail, while fantasies of future adventures spun elaborate scenarios that seemed more real than the present moment. Emotions surged through him like weather systems, bringing storms of anger, floods of desire, and sudden clearings of unexpected peace. The Monkey King realized that he had never truly been alone before, had never experienced the full intensity of his own inner landscape without the buffer of external activity. Hours passed, or perhaps days. Time seemed to lose its usual meaning in the cave's timeless atmosphere. Gradually, the initial chaos of his mental activity began to settle like sediment sinking to the bottom of a disturbed pond. The thoughts continued to arise, but with less urgency and force, while the emotions that had seemed so overwhelming began to reveal themselves as temporary visitors rather than permanent residents of his consciousness. In the growing quiet, the Monkey King began to sense something beneath the surface activity of his mind, a presence that remained constant regardless of what thoughts or emotions might be passing through. This presence was not empty, but full, not absent, but intensely aware, not separate from his thoughts and emotions, but somehow larger than them, like the sky that contains all weather, without being affected by any particular storm or season. As this recognition deepened, he began to understand why the Buddha was spoken of with such reverence. The peace that seemed to elude him, despite all his power and achievements, was not something to be grasped or conquered, but something to be recognized as already present, like the space in which all experience arose and dissolved. The cave around him seemed to pulse with this recognition, its crystal walls reflecting not just light but awareness itself, creating a mandala of understanding that encompassed both the seeker and the sought. The realization came not as a dramatic revelation, but as a gentle dawning like sunrise, gradually illuminating a landscape that had always been there but remained hidden in darkness. The Monkey King saw that his restless search for satisfaction had been like trying to catch his own shadow, always moving away from him, because he was the very thing creating the movement. The peace he sought was not somewhere else waiting to be found, but here now, in the very awareness that was seeking it. In the depths of his meditation, the Monkey King experienced a profound shift that seemed to alter the very fabric of his being. The cave around him no longer felt like a separate space, but rather like an extension of his own consciousness, its crystalline walls reflecting the clarity that was beginning to emerge within his awareness. The boundary between inner and outer, between self and environment, began to dissolve in a way that was both startling and deeply natural, like remembering something he had always known but temporarily forgotten. As this dissolution deepened, he became aware of a presence approaching from far below on the mountain. The footsteps were so light they barely disturbed the ancient stones, yet each step seemed to send ripples through the fabric of reality itself. The Monkey King's enhanced senses, sharpened by his time in meditation, could perceive not just the physical approach of this being, but something far more significant, the quality of consciousness that moved with those gentle steps. The presence ascending the mountain carried with it a field of such profound peace that even the wind seemed to still in reverence. Birds fell silent not from fear, but from a kind of natural respect, while the very stones of the mountain appeared to arrange themselves more harmoniously as the figure passed. The Monkey King had encountered many powerful beings in his long existence, but none had ever affected the environment around them through the simple quality of their presence, rather than through displays of force or magic. As the footsteps drew closer to the cave, the Monkey King felt his own consciousness expanding to meet this approaching awareness. It was as if two vast oceans were about to merge, each recognizing in the other a depth and vastness that transcended individual identity. Yet there was no sense of threat or competition in this meeting, only a profound recognition of something that had always been true, but was now being revealed in its full glory. The figure that appeared at the cave entrance was both exactly what the Monkey King had expected and completely beyond his imagination. Buddha stood silhouetted against the mountain sky, his form radiating a light that seemed to come not from any external source, but from the very essence of awakened consciousness itself. His robes moved gently in the mountain breeze, and his face bore an expression of such complete serenity that, looking upon it, was like gazing into the depths of a perfectly still lake that reflected the entire cosmos. When Buddha spoke, his voice carried the authority of absolute truth, spoken with infinite compassion. He did not greet the Monkey King as a stranger, but as an old friend who had finally remembered their true nature after a long period of forgetfulness. His words were simple, yet they seemed to contain within them the accumulated wisdom of countless lifetimes spent in service to the awakening of all beings. Buddha entered the cave with movements that seemed to flow like water, each gesture perfectly aligned with the natural harmony of the space. As he settled into a position facing the Monkey King, the cave itself seemed to respond to his presence, its crystals glowing more brightly and its acoustics becoming even more perfectly attuned to the subtle vibrations of enlightened speech. The air between them shimmered with potential, as if the very atoms were rearranging themselves to better conduct the transmission of wisdom that was about to unfold. The conversation that followed was unlike any the Monkey King had ever experienced. Buddha did not speak in riddles or abstract philosophical concepts, but in language that went directly to the heart of experience itself. Each word seemed to land in the Monkey King's consciousness with the precision of an arrow, finding its target, dissolving layers of confusion and misunderstanding that had accumulated over countless lifetimes of seeking satisfaction in external achievements. Buddha spoke of the nature of suffering not as an abstract concept, but as the inevitable result of seeking permanent satisfaction in a world of constant change. He described how the very immortality the Monkey King had fought so hard to achieve was itself a form of prison, binding him to an endless cycle of desire and disappointment that could only be broken through the recognition of his true nature. The words were spoken with such gentle authority that they bypassed the Monkey King's usual defenses and skepticism, landing directly in the space of pure understanding. As Buddha continued to speak, the Monkey King began to see his entire existence from a completely new perspective. His countless victories and conquests, his accumulation of power and status, his very identity as the Monkey King. All of these appeared now as elaborate dreams that had seemed real only because he had been so deeply asleep. The awakening that was occurring was not the addition of something new, but the removal of something false, like wiping dust from a mirror to reveal the clarity that had always been present. The teaching continued through the night, though neither teacher nor student seemed aware of time's passage. Buddha's words flowed like a river of light, carrying away the accumulated debris of lifetimes while revealing the bedrock of pure awareness that lay beneath. The Monkey King found himself laughing with recognition as each new understanding dawned, not the wild laughter of his previous adventures, but the gentle laughter of one who suddenly sees the cosmic joke of having searched everywhere for something that was never lost. As dawn approached, Buddha's teaching began to focus on the practical implications of this awakening. He spoke of compassion not as a sentiment, but as the natural expression of wisdom arising spontaneously when the illusion of separation dissolved. He described how true power lay not in the ability to control external circumstances, but in the freedom to respond to whatever arose with perfect appropriateness, like water that naturally flows around obstacles without resistance or struggle. The Monkey King listened with an attention so complete that he seemed to merge with the very words being spoken. His usual restlessness had been replaced by a stillness so profound that it contained within it all possible movement, while his habitual desire for conquest had transformed into a longing to serve the awakening of all beings. The transformation was not dramatic, but gentle. Like ice melting into water, the essential nature remained the same, while the form became infinitely more fluid and responsive. As the first light of dawn began to filter into the cave, Buddha rose with the same fluid grace that had marked his arrival. His teaching was complete, not because there was nothing more to say, but because the Monkey King had received everything necessary for his own awakening to unfold naturally. The seeds of wisdom had been planted in the fertile ground of his sincere seeking, and now they needed only time and proper conditions to bloom into full realization. Before departing, Buddha paused at the cave entrance and turned back to face the Monkey King with eyes that held the depth of infinite compassion. In that gaze, the Monkey King saw reflected not his past identity as a warrior and conqueror, but his true nature as pure awareness itself, temporarily clothed in the form of an immortal being, but essentially no different from the Buddha who stood before him. The recognition was mutual and instantaneous, a meeting of awakened consciousness that transcended all concepts of teacher and student, enlightened and unenlightened. Buddha's final words echoed in the crystalline chamber long after his physical form had disappeared down the mountain path. He had spoken of a great gathering that would soon take place, a convergence of awakened beings from across all realms of existence. This assembly would not be held in any particular location, but would manifest wherever consciousness recognized its own true nature, creating a field of such profound peace that it would ripple outward to touch all sentient beings throughout the cosmos. The Monkey King remained in the cave for 7 days and nights, following Buddha's departure, allowing the teachings to integrate fully into his being. During this time, he experienced a series of profound transformations that seemed to unfold naturally, like a flower opening to receive the morning sun. Each day brought new depths of understanding, while each night revealed layers of conditioning and false identity that dissolved in the light of awakened awareness. On the first day, he became aware of how his previous life had been driven by a fundamental misunderstanding about the nature of happiness. He had believed that joy could be accumulated like treasure, stored up through victories and achievements to be drawn upon in times of need. Now he saw that true happiness was not something to be grasped, but something to be allowed not a destination to be reached, but the very ground of being itself, always present and available regardless of external circumstances. The second day brought recognition of the interconnected nature of all existence. The Monkey King began to perceive the web of relationships that connected every atom in the universe to every other atom, every thought to every other thought, every being to every other being. His previous sense of himself as a separate individual competing against others for limited resources dissolved into an understanding of existence as a single vast organism in which every part served the well-being of the whole. By the third day, the concept of time itself had begun to transform in his awareness. The linear progression from past to future, which had previously driven his endless seeking and striving, revealed itself as a mental construct overlaid upon the eternal present moment. He began to experience each instant as complete in itself, containing within it all of eternity, while simultaneously being part of an infinite unfolding that had no beginning and would have no end. The fourth day brought a profound shift in his relationship to his own immortality. What had once seemed like the ultimate achievement now appeared as simply one of many possible expressions of consciousness. He understood that true immortality lay not in the preservation of any particular form, but in the recognition of the deathless awareness that was his essential nature, the same awareness that animated all beings throughout all realms of existence. On the fifth day, the Monkey King experienced what could only be described as a complete dissolution of his personal identity. The stories he had told himself about who he was, the roles he had played, the achievements he had accumulated, all of these revealed themselves as temporary costumes worn by the eternal actor of consciousness. Yet this dissolution was not a loss, but a liberation, freeing him from the burden of maintaining a false self while revealing the infinite creativity and spontaneity of his true nature. The sixth day brought an understanding of compassion that went far beyond anything he had previously imagined. He saw that the suffering of all beings was ultimately his own suffering, arising from the same fundamental misunderstanding about the nature of reality that had driven his own endless seeking. This recognition gave birth to a profound desire to serve the awakening of all consciousness, not from a sense of duty or obligation, but from the natural expression of love, recognizing itself in all its myriad forms. On the seventh day, as the sun reached its zenith above the mountain peak, the Monkey King experienced what Buddha had called the Great Awakening. It came not as a dramatic event, but as the gentle recognition of what had always been true, like waking from a dream and realizing that the dreamer had never actually been asleep. The cave around him seemed to dissolve into pure light, while his own form became transparent, revealing the luminous awareness that was both his deepest identity and the source of all existence. In this state of complete awakening, the Monkey King understood that his journey was far from over. Indeed, it was just beginning. For now, he would travel not as a seeker searching for something outside himself, but as an expression of awakened consciousness serving the liberation of all beings. The restlessness that had driven him for so long transformed into a dynamic stillness, a peace so profound that it could manifest as any action required by the circumstances of each moment. As he prepared to leave the cave, the Monkey King felt the presence of countless awakened beings throughout the cosmos, all connected in a vast network of compassionate awareness. He understood that he was now part of this invisible assembly, this gathering of consciousness that Buddha had spoken of, which existed not in any particular place or time, but in the eternal present moment where all awakened beings naturally resided. The mountain path that had brought him to the cave now appeared as a golden thread of light, leading back into the world of form and activity. Yet he knew that wherever this path might lead, he would never again lose sight of the truth he had discovered in the crystalline silence of the cave. The Monkey King who descended the mountain was the same being who had climbed it, yet transformed beyond recognition, carrying within his awakened heart the light of understanding that could illuminate the darkness of ignorance wherever it might be found. As he walked, the very stones beneath his feet seemed to pulse with recognition, while the wind carried his presence like a blessing to all the beings dwelling in the valleys below. The great work of awakening had begun, and the Monkey King now understood that every step he took, every breath he drew, every word he spoke would serve this sacred purpose of helping all consciousness recognize its own true nature. The descent from the sacred mountain carried the Monkey King through landscapes that seemed to shimmer with new meaning, as if the very earth had been transformed by his awakened perception. Each step along the winding path revealed layers of beauty and significance that had been invisible during his ascent, when his mind had been focused solely on reaching his destination. Now, freed from the urgency of seeking, he could perceive the profound teachings embedded in every stone, every blade of grass, every play of light and shadow across the mountain's face. The forests through which he passed no longer appeared as mere collections of trees, but as living mandalas of interconnected consciousness. Each pine needle caught the sunlight in a way that seemed to transmit messages of ancient wisdom, while the forest floor beneath his feet pulsed with the slow, deep rhythm of roots communicating through networks invisible to ordinary sight. The Monkey King found himself pausing frequently, not from fatigue but from wonder, as each moment revealed new depths of meaning in what had previously seemed like simple natural phenomena. Birds called to him from hidden branches, their songs now clearly audible as expressions of pure joy, untainted by the desires and fears that clouded the communications of more complex beings. A family of deer emerged from a grove of bamboo, approaching without fear as they sensed the profound peace that now radiated from his presence. The youngest fawn nuzzled his hand with complete trust, recognizing in him not the fierce warrior of legend, but the gentle awareness that was his true nature. As he continued his journey, the Monkey King began to encounter other seekers making their way up the mountain paths. Some were monks in simple robes, their faces bearing the serene determination of those who had dedicated their lives to the pursuit of wisdom. Others were lay people from distant lands, carrying the dust of long travels and the bright hope of those who had heard whispers of enlightenment and could not rest until they had experienced it for themselves. To each of these pilgrims, the Monkey King offered what they most needed, though he spoke few words. His very presence seemed to transmit the peace he had discovered, creating a field of calm around him that allowed others to taste, however briefly, the freedom from suffering that was their birthright. Some recognized him as the legendary Monkey King and fell to their knees in reverence, but he gently raised them up, his eyes conveying that the awakened nature they honored in him was the same nature that dwelt within their own hearts. One elderly pilgrim, bent with age and struggling with each step up the steep path, collapsed from exhaustion just as the Monkey King approached. Without hesitation, he lifted the old man in his arms, carrying him to a shaded grove where a clear spring bubbled from the rocks. As he helped the pilgrim drink the cool water, the old man's eyes filled with tears of gratitude, not just for the physical assistance, but for the profound love that flowed through such simple acts of kindness. The pilgrim spoke of his lifelong search for a teacher who could show him the way to liberation from the cycle of birth and death. He had traveled to countless temples, studied with numerous masters, and practiced meditation for decades, yet the peace he sought remained elusive. The Monkey King listened with complete attention, his silence more eloquent than any words could have been. When the old man finished speaking, the Monkey King simply placed his hand on the pilgrim's heart and smiled, and in that moment, the seeker experienced the recognition he had been pursuing for so many years. As word of these encounters spread among the pilgrims on the mountain, more and more seekers began to gather wherever the Monkey King paused in his journey. Yet, he never allowed these gatherings to become formal teachings or organized assemblies. Instead, he moved like water, flowing naturally from one encounter to the next, appearing wherever his presence was most needed and disappearing when his work was complete. In a village at the mountain's base, he found a community torn apart by a bitter dispute over water rights. The drought had lasted for months, and the single well that served the entire village was running dry. Neighbors who had lived in harmony for generations now faced each other with suspicion and anger, each family hoarding what little water they could obtain while viewing others as competitors for this precious resource. The Monkey King arrived in the village square just as the conflict was reaching its peak, with heated arguments threatening to escalate into violence. He said nothing, but simply sat beneath the ancient banyan tree at the center of the square and began to meditate. His presence was so profoundly peaceful that gradually, one by one, the arguing villagers fell silent and found themselves drawn to sit near him. As the hours passed, something remarkable began to happen. The villagers sitting in the field of peace that surrounded the Monkey King began to remember their essential connection to one another. The artificial divisions created by fear and scarcity dissolved in the light of awakened awareness, revealing the underlying unity that had always existed beneath the surface of their conflicts. Without any words being spoken, they began to understand that their survival depended not on competing with each other, but on cooperating as members of a single community. When the Monkey King finally opened his eyes, the villagers had already begun to organize themselves into work groups, some digging new wells, while others traveled to distant streams to carry water for those too old or weak to make the journey themselves. The transformation was so complete that it seemed miraculous, yet it had arisen naturally from the recognition of their shared humanity, catalyzed by the presence of one who had awakened to the truth of universal compassion. As he prepared to leave the village, the eldest resident approached him with tears streaming down her weathered face. She had lived through many droughts and conflicts, she said, but had never witnessed such a profound transformation in the hearts of her neighbors. She asked what teaching he had given them, what words of wisdom had created such a miracle. The Monkey King smiled gently and replied that he had given them nothing they did not already possess, had taught them nothing they did not already know in the depths of their hearts. He had simply created the conditions for their own wisdom and compassion to emerge naturally, like flowers blooming when the soil is properly prepared. The journey continued through countless such encounters, each one unique yet expressing the same fundamental truth that awakened consciousness, when allowed to shine freely naturally, dissolves the illusions that create suffering and separation. The Monkey King moved through the world like a gentle breeze, barely disturbing the surface of things, yet carrying the fragrance of liberation to all who were ready to receive it. The path eventually led the Monkey King to a vast desert that stretched beyond the horizon, its golden sands shifting constantly under the influence of winds that seemed to carry whispers from distant realms. This was the Desert of Mirrors, a legendary place where travelers were said to encounter reflections of their deepest truths, where the harsh environment stripped away all pretense and illusion to reveal what lay beneath the surface of ordinary consciousness. As he walked across the burning sands, the Monkey King noticed that his footprints disappeared almost immediately, erased by the ever-moving grains that recognized no permanent mark upon their surface. The lesson was clear. In the vastness of awakened awareness, even the most significant actions left no lasting trace, arising and dissolving like waves upon an infinite ocean. This understanding brought with it a profound sense of freedom, releasing him from any attachment to the results of his compassionate activities. The desert sun blazed overhead with an intensity that would have been unbearable to ordinary beings. Yet the Monkey King found it merely another expression of the same luminous awareness that he had discovered within himself. The heat that seemed to threaten destruction was revealed as the same energy that gave life to all things, its apparent harshness merely a reflection of the observer's relationship to what was being experienced. As the day progressed, mirages began to appear on the horizon, shimmering visions of oases and cities that seemed to beckon with promises of relief and comfort. The Monkey King recognized these illusions for what they were, yet he also understood their deeper significance as reflections of the mind's tendency to project its desires onto the neutral screen of reality. Each mirage that appeared and dissolved served as a teaching about the nature of perception and the importance of distinguishing between what was actually present and what was merely hoped for or feared. In the deepest part of the desert, where the silence was so complete that it seemed to have weight and substance, the Monkey King encountered a figure seated in meditation upon a dune that never shifted despite the constant wind. As he approached, he recognized another awakened being, one whose presence had been calling to him across the vast expanse of sand through channels deeper than ordinary communication. This desert sage had been sitting in the same spot for countless years, serving as a beacon of stability and peace for travelers who found themselves lost in the shifting landscape of their own minds. His body had been weathered by sun and wind until it resembled the ancient rocks that occasionally protruded from the sand. Yet his eyes held the same luminous clarity that the Monkey King had seen in Buddha's gaze. Without words, the two awakened beings shared a communion that transcended all concepts of time and space. In that meeting, the Monkey King understood that the network of awakened consciousness extended far beyond what he had previously imagined, encompassing beings in every realm and dimension who had realized their true nature and dedicated themselves to the liberation of all sentient life. The desert sage spoke of the great cycles that govern the manifestation of wisdom in the world. How periods of darkness and confusion were always followed by times of awakening and clarity, like the eternal rhythm of night and day. He explained that they were now approaching one of the great turning points in cosmic history, when the accumulated suffering of countless beings would reach a critical mass that would catalyze a widespread awakening unlike anything that had occurred before. As they sat together in the profound silence of the desert, the Monkey King began to perceive subtle movements in the fabric of reality itself. Streams of light flowed between distant points in space, carrying information and energy that connected all awakened beings in a vast web of conscious communication. He could sense the presence of countless others like himself, each serving in their own unique way to prepare for the great transformation that was approaching. The desert sage shared visions of what was to come, cities of light that would arise not through construction, but through the collective awakening of their inhabitants, technologies powered not by the exploitation of natural resources, but by the direct application of conscious intention and forms of governance, based not on the exercise of power over others, but on the recognition of the fundamental unity that connected all beings. Yet, he also spoke of the challenges that lay ahead, the resistance that would arise from those who had invested their identity in the old patterns of separation and conflict. The transition would not be without difficulty, as the structures built upon illusion would not dissolve easily, and many would cling to familiar forms of suffering rather than embrace the unknown territory of authentic freedom. As the sun began to set, painting the desert in shades of gold and crimson that seemed to pulse with inner light, the desert sage rose from his meditation posture for the first time in decades. His movement was fluid and graceful despite his apparent age, demonstrating the vitality that flowed naturally through a form no longer constrained by the limitations of ordinary consciousness. Together, they walked to the crest of a high dune that offered a panoramic view of the entire desert. From this vantage point, the Monkey King could see that what had appeared to be an empty wasteland was actually teeming with life and activity invisible to casual observation. Streams of energy flowed beneath the surface of the sand, connecting distant oases in a network of mutual support, while subtle beings moved through dimensions that intersected with the physical realm at specific points and times. The desert sage pointed to a particular star that was just becoming visible in the darkening sky, explaining that it marked the location of a gathering place where representatives from all realms of existence would soon convene to coordinate their efforts in the great work of awakening. This assembly would not be limited to beings who had achieved complete enlightenment, but would include all those who had recognized their true nature to any degree, and were willing to serve the liberation of consciousness wherever it might be found. As the night deepened and the desert air grew cool, the two awakened beings shared the simple meal that the sage had sustained himself with during his long vigil dates and water that had been blessed by his continuous meditation, transforming ordinary sustenance into spiritual nourishment that fed not just the body, but the soul itself. Each bite carried the essence of pure awareness, while each sip of water tasted of the primordial source from which all existence had emerged. The conversation continued through the night, though much of their communication took place in the silence between words, in the direct transmission of understanding that flowed between awakened minds like light passing through clear crystal. They spoke of the various forms that compassionate action might take in the coming times, from the subtle influence of awakened presence to more direct interventions when circumstances required them. As dawn approached the desert, sage prepared to resume his meditation, his work in that particular location not yet complete. But before they parted, he gave the Monkey King a small crystal that had been formed deep within the earth over millions of years, its structure perfectly aligned to receive and transmit the frequencies of awakened consciousness. This crystal would serve as a communication device, allowing him to remain in contact with the network of awakened beings regardless of where his journey might take him. The crystal pulsed gently in the Monkey King's palm as he left the desert behind its soft luminescence, serving as a constant reminder of his connection to the vast network of awakened consciousness that spanned all dimensions of existence. The weight of it was negligible, yet it seemed to anchor him to a purpose far greater than any he had pursued in his previous adventures. Each pulse synchronized with his heartbeat, creating a rhythm that harmonized his individual awareness with the cosmic symphony of enlightened beings working in service to universal liberation. His path now led through a region of rolling hills, covered in ancient forests, where massive trees had grown for thousands of years without disturbance from human activity. The canopy was so thick that the forest floor existed in a perpetual twilight, illuminated only by occasional shafts of golden sunlight that filtered through the leaves like pillars of crystallized awareness. In this primordial landscape, the Monkey King could sense the presence of beings far older than himself. Consciousness that had awakened within forms that predated the emergence of human civilization. The trees themselves seemed to pulse with a slow, deep awareness that encompassed centuries in each moment of perception. Their roots formed an underground network that connected the entire forest in a single vast organism of shared consciousness, while their branches reached toward the sky in gestures of perpetual prayer and gratitude. As the Monkey King walked among these ancient giants, he could feel their recognition of his awakened state, a wordless welcome that acknowledged him as a fellow participant in the great work of conscious evolution. In a clearing at the heart of the forest, he discovered a circle of standing stones that had been placed there by beings whose names had been forgotten by history, but whose wisdom remained embedded in the very atoms of the granite monoliths. Each stone was carved with symbols that seemed to shift and change as he observed them, revealing different layers of meaning depending on the depth of his attention. The symbols spoke of cycles within cycles of the eternal dance between form and emptiness that gave rise to all manifestation. At the center of the stone circle, a natural spring bubbled up from deep within the earth, its waters so pure and clear that they seemed to contain liquid light itself. The Monkey King knelt beside the spring and cupped the water in his hands, drinking deeply of its essence. The water tasted of starlight and ancient wisdom, carrying within it the memory of every raindrop that had ever fallen, every river that had ever flowed, every ocean that had ever reflected the face of the moon. As he drank, visions began to arise in his consciousness, not as separate experiences, but as direct knowing that seemed to emerge from the water itself. He saw the history of awakening on countless worlds throughout the universe, the endless variety of forms that consciousness had taken in its journey toward self-recognition. On some worlds, awakening had come through beings of pure energy who communicated through patterns of light. On others, it had manifested through collective organisms that achieved enlightenment as unified wholes rather than as separate individuals. The visions showed him that the process he was now part of was not unique to this particular world or time, but was instead a fundamental aspect of consciousness itself, an inevitable flowering that occurred whenever awareness reached a certain level of complexity and integration. Yet each instance of this cosmic awakening was also completely unique, shaped by the specific conditions and beings through which it manifested. As the visions faded, the Monkey King became aware of a presence approaching through the forest, moving with such grace and silence that even his enhanced senses could barely detect it. When the figure finally emerged into the clearing, he saw that it was a being unlike any he had encountered before. neither fully human nor entirely other, but something that seemed to bridge multiple dimensions of existence simultaneously. This forest guardian had been awakened for so long that the distinction between their consciousness and the consciousness of the forest itself had dissolved completely. They spoke through the rustling of leaves, communicated through the play of light and shadow, and expressed emotion through the subtle changes in the forest's atmosphere. Their presence was both ancient and eternally fresh, like a spring that had been flowing for millennia, yet delivered water that was always new. The guardians spoke of the approaching convergence, the great gathering, that would bring together awakened beings from across all realms of existence. This assembly would not take place in any single location, but would manifest simultaneously in multiple dimensions, creating a resonance field so powerful that it would catalyze awakening in beings who had never even heard the word enlightenment. The forest itself would serve as one of the anchor points for this multi-dimensional gathering, its ancient stability providing a foundation for energies that transcended ordinary space and time. As they communicated, the Monkey King began to understand his specific role in the unfolding cosmic drama. His unique combination of power and humility, his journey from ego-driven conquest to selfless service, made him an ideal bridge between different types of consciousness. He would serve as a translator and facilitator, helping beings who had awakened through different paths to recognize their fundamental unity and coordinate their efforts in the great work ahead. The forest guardian led him deeper into the woods to a grove, where the trees grew in perfect spirals that seemed to mirror the structure of galaxies and DNA molecules simultaneously. Here, other awakened beings had begun to gather, each one representing a different aspect of the cosmic awakening that was taking place. There was a being of pure sound who communicated through harmonics that bypassed the mind and spoke directly to the soul, and another who existed primarily as geometric patterns of light that conveyed meaning through their endless transformations. A council began to form naturally, without any formal organization or hierarchy, as each being contributed their unique perspective to the collective understanding of what was needed. The Monkey King found himself serving as a focal point for the discussion, his recent transformation, allowing him to appreciate both the challenges faced by those still caught in illusion and the vast possibilities available to those who had awakened to their true nature. They spoke of the delicate balance required in the coming times, the need to offer support and guidance to those ready to awaken while respecting the free will of those who chose to remain in familiar patterns of suffering. The transformation could not be forced, they understood, but could only be invited through the creation of conditions that made awakening more likely and more attractive than continued sleep. As the council continued through the night, the crystal in the Monkey King's possession began to pulse more rapidly, indicating that similar gatherings were taking place simultaneously in locations throughout the cosmos. The network of awakened consciousness was activating itself, preparing for a coordinated effort that would span dimensions and encompass forms of life that existed far beyond the boundaries of ordinary perception. The forest around them seemed to participate in the council, its ancient wisdom adding depth and stability to their deliberations. The trees swayed in patterns that mirrored the flow of their conversation, while the spring at the center of the stone circle bubbled with increased intensity, as if responding to the heightened energy of the gathering. Even the stars visible through the canopy appeared to pulse in rhythm with their discussions, creating a sense of cosmic participation in their earthly assembly. As dawn approached, the council reached a consensus about the timing and nature of the great awakening that was approaching. It would begin with subtle shifts in consciousness that would gradually accelerate until they reached a critical mass, at which point the transformation would become self-sustaining and irreversible. The role of awakened beings would be to serve as catalysts and guides during this process, helping to ensure that the transition occurred with as little suffering and confusion as possible. As the first rays of sunlight filtered through the ancient canopy, the forest council began to dissolve. As naturally as it had formed, each awakened being returning to their specific sphere of service with a renewed sense of purpose and connection. The Monkey King felt the crystal in his possession pulse with a new frequency, indicating that his next destination had been determined through the collective wisdom of the assembly. He would journey to the celestial palace of mirrors, a realm that existed at the intersection of all dimensions, where the final preparations for the Great Awakening would take place. The path to this ethereal destination required him to ascend through layers of reality that became increasingly subtle and refined as he climbed higher. Each level of existence operated according to different laws and principles, yet all were unified by the same fundamental awareness that he had discovered within himself. The physical world gradually gave way to realms of pure energy, then to dimensions of living geometry, and finally to spaces where consciousness itself was the primary substance from which all experience was woven. The celestial palace of mirrors materialized around him as he reached the appropriate level of refinement, its crystalline walls reflecting not images but states of consciousness, creating an infinite kaleidoscope of awakened awareness. Each surface showed a different aspect of enlightenment, from the fierce compassion of warrior bodhisattvas to the gentle wisdom of those who had found peace through surrender. The palace existed in a state of constant transformation, its architecture shifting to accommodate the needs of whatever beings were present at any given moment. At the heart of the palace, in a chamber that seemed to contain the essence of all space and time, Buddha waited in meditation. His presence filled the vast room with such profound stillness that even the mirrors ceased their constant shifting, becoming perfectly clear windows into the nature of reality itself. The Monkey King approached with reverence, understanding that this meeting would mark the culmination of his journey from restless seeker to awakened servant of universal liberation. Buddha's eyes opened as the Monkey King entered the chamber, and in that gaze was reflected the entire journey that had brought them to this moment. Every step along the mountain path, every encounter with suffering beings, every moment of doubt and breakthrough was acknowledged and blessed by the infinite compassion that flowed through the awakened one's presence. The recognition was complete, and mutual teacher and student dissolving into the single awareness that had always been their true identity. The conversation that followed transcended ordinary language, taking place in the direct transmission of understanding that flows between awakened minds like light passing through crystal. Buddha spoke of the great cycles of cosmic evolution, how consciousness periodically awakens to its own nature on a massive scale, transforming entire galaxies and dimensions in the process. They were now approaching one of these great turning points, a moment when the accumulated wisdom of countless awakened beings would reach critical mass and catalyze a transformation beyond anything previously imagined. The Monkey King learned that his role in this cosmic drama was both humble and essential. He would serve as a bridge between the realm of awakened consciousness and the world of ordinary experience, helping to translate the profound truths of enlightenment into forms that could be understood and integrated by beings at every level of development. His unique combination of power and compassion, his journey from ego-driven ambition to selfless service, made him an ideal catalyst for the awakening of others. As they communicated, the mirrors surrounding them began to show visions of the transformation that was already beginning to unfold across countless worlds and dimensions. In some realms, the awakening manifested as a sudden recognition of unity that dissolved all conflict and separation. In others, it appeared as a gradual shift in consciousness that transformed the very nature of existence from competition to collaboration, from scarcity to abundance, from fear to love. The visions revealed that the process was not limited to any particular species or form of life, but encompassed all expressions of consciousness throughout the universe. Planets themselves were awakening to their role as living beings, while stars began to coordinate their activities in service to the evolution of awareness. Galaxies started to communicate with each other through patterns of light and energy that carried information about the most effective ways to support the flowering of consciousness. Buddha explained that the awakening was not something that would happen to consciousness, but rather something that consciousness would recognize it had always been. The illusion of separation and suffering was dissolving, not because it was being destroyed, but because it was being seen through like a mirage that disappears when observed from the correct perspective. The transformation was both the most natural thing in the universe and the most miraculous, as ordinary as breathing and as extraordinary as the birth of stars. The Monkey King understood that his previous adventures, all his battles and conquests, had been preparation for this moment when he would serve not his own desires, but the awakening of all beings. Every challenge he had faced, every victory he had won, every moment of suffering he had endured, had been purifying and strengthening him for the role he would now play in the cosmic drama of enlightenment. As their communion deepened, the palace around them began to resonate with harmonics that seemed to emanate from the very structure of reality itself. The mirrors reflected not just images, but pure awareness, creating a field of such intense clarity that the boundaries between observer and observed dissolved completely. In this state of perfect unity, the Monkey King received the final transmission of wisdom that would guide his service in the times ahead. The teaching came not as words or concepts, but as a direct download of understanding that integrated seamlessly with his awakened consciousness. He saw how every action, every word, every thought could serve the awakening of others when it arose from the space of pure awareness rather than from personal desire or aversion. The smallest gesture of kindness could catalyze profound transformation, while the most dramatic intervention might be unnecessary if the conditions were not appropriate. Buddha rose from his meditation posture, his movement creating ripples of light that spread throughout the palace and beyond, touching every corner of existence with the blessing of awakened presence. The time for preparation was ending, and the time for active service was beginning. The Great Awakening was no longer a future possibility, but a present reality that was manifesting through the coordinated efforts of countless awakened beings throughout the cosmos. The Monkey King felt the crystal in his possession pulse with unprecedented intensity, indicating that the network of awakened consciousness was fully activated and ready to begin its work. He understood that he would now return to the world of ordinary experience, but carrying within him the full realization of his true nature and his cosmic purpose. Every being he encountered would be touched by the awakening presence that flowed through him, whether they were conscious of it or not. As he prepared to leave the celestial palace of mirrors, Buddha offered him a final gift, a lotus flower that existed simultaneously in all dimensions, its petals opening to reveal the infinite creativity of awakened consciousness. This flower would serve as a reminder that enlightenment was not a destination to be reached, but a reality to be lived, not a state to be achieved, but a presence to be embodied in every moment of existence. With the lotus flower in hand and the crystal pulsing at his heart, the Monkey King stepped from the celestial palace of mirrors into the world of form once more. The transition was seamless, as if he were simply moving from one breath to the next, yet everything was subtly changed. The air shimmered with possibility, and each sound, each color, each sensation was alive with the vibrant presence of awakened consciousness. He found himself standing on a mountain ridge at dawn, the sky ablaze with hues of gold and rose. Below, the world stretched out in all directions, rivers winding like silver threads, forests breathing in the morning mist, villages waking to the gentle rhythms of daily life. The Monkey King felt the pulse of life in every corner of the land, a single unified field of awareness expressing itself in infinite forms. He walked down the mountain path, his every step a blessing, his every breath a silent mantra of gratitude. Wherever he went, the atmosphere seemed to shift. Old conflicts softened, misunderstandings unraveled, and the seeds of compassion took root in hearts that had long been closed. He spoke little, for his presence alone carried the teaching that words could only hint at. His eyes, bright with the light of realization, met those of farmers, children, elders, and travelers, and in each meeting something subtle awakened a memory of unity, a glimpse of peace, a spark of joy. In a bustling marketplace he paused to help a child who had fallen, lifting her gently and smiling as she brushed away her tears. The simple act radiated outward, softening the hurried faces of those nearby, reminding them of their own capacity for kindness. In a quiet village, he sat beneath a tree and listened to the stories of the old and the dreams of the young, his attention so complete that each person felt truly seen for the first time in their lives. The Monkey King's journey became a living meditation, each moment an opportunity to embody the awakened presence he had realized. In the cave, the desert, the forest, and the palace of mirrors, he moved through the world like a gentle breeze, invisible yet unmistakable, leaving behind a trail of harmony and renewal. The crystal at his heart glowed softly, signaling his connection to the vast network of awakened beings whose silent support guided his every action. As the days passed, subtle changes began to ripple through the land. People found themselves waking with a sense of hope they could not explain, drawn to acts of generosity and understanding. Old grievances faded, replaced by a willingness to forgive and begin anew. The natural world responded. As well, rivers ran clearer, trees grew stronger, and the air itself seemed lighter, as if the earth were breathing a sigh of relief. One evening, as the sun set behind distant mountains, the Monkey King came to a great river where people from many lands had gathered. They had heard rumors of his presence, stories of miracles and transformations, and had come seeking wisdom, healing, or simply the comfort of being near one who radiated such peace. The Monkey King sat on the riverbank, the lotus flower resting in his lap, and invited the people to join him in silence. As dusk deepened into night, a profound stillness settled over the gathering. The river's gentle song blended with the quiet breathing of the assembled crowd, and for a timeless moment all sense of separation dissolved. Each person felt themselves part of something vast and loving, a field of awareness that included every being, every star, every grain of sand. The Monkey King's presence was like a mirror, reflecting back to each one their own true nature, boundless, luminous, and free. When the moon rose high, the Monkey King spoke at last, his words flowing like the river itself, gentle, clear, and nourishing. He reminded them that the peace they sought was not something to be found outside themselves, but the very essence of their own awareness. He encouraged them to trust the quiet wisdom within, to act with kindness and courage, and to remember that every moment was an opportunity to awaken, to serve, to love. The people listened not just with their ears, but with their hearts, and something deep within them shifted. They left the riverbank transformed, carrying the light of awakening back to their homes, their families, their communities. The Monkey King watched them go, his heart overflowing with gratitude for the privilege of serving the great work of liberation. As the night grew quiet, he gazed at the lotus in his hands, its petals shimmering with the light of 1,000 worlds. He understood now that the journey had no end, that awakening was not a final destination, but an endless unfolding, a dance of consciousness, celebrating itself in every form, every moment, every breath. He closed his eyes and let the silence deepen, merging with the stillness that underlies all things. In that silence, he felt the presence of Buddha, the desert sage, the forest guardian, and all the awakened beings throughout the cosmos, a single boundless awareness, awake and at peace. And so the Monkey King rested not as a conqueror or a seeker, but as a living expression of the awakened heart, forever at home in the infinite embrace of the present moment. In this way, the legendary tale continued, not as a story with an ending, but as an invitation for all beings to awaken, to remember, and to rest deeply in the peace that is their true nature.